All right, everyone, welcome to session 3 of our book study. Today, the topic is a quality of mind that knows no separation. For those of you who may be joining for the first time, a couple of quick logistical notes. Professor Krishna will be summarizing today's topic in the first 40 minutes of our session, and then we'll have a 5-minute break, and then we'll be having a Q&A session. And due to the large number of participants, we ask you to submit your questions via chat. And please wait and enter your questions in the chat after Professor Krishna has completed his talk, because he may answer your question in his talk. And Krasimir will be coordinating the Q questions and answer session today. And all participants will be muted throughout this session. Professor Krishna, you've unmuted yourself, so that's good. And the session is being recorded so that you can review it in the future. It'll come out in a future email. And with that, Professor Krishna, you have the floor.
Thank you. I also have to begin with a few announcements. We will not be having any session next weekend because the KFA gathering is on in the next weekend, and they usually have a number of talks based on Krishnamurti's teachings over Zoom. So participants who are interested in joining that can join that, and there will be no clash with what we are doing. So I'll see you next after 2 weeks, instead of the usual 1 week. The other thing I have to tell is that next time we meet, which will be two weeks later, we shall be discussing 3 questions and answers from part 2 of the book. Capacity to listen, which starts on page 69. Standing against society, which starts on page 95. And love, sex, and religious life, which starts on page 61. So at your leisure, you can read these 3 question answers from the book, so that you are aware of what we are going to discuss. Now, in today's topic, which is a mind that knows no separation, Krishna makes the following points, which I will not elaborate on because you must have read them, but we can discuss at the end of the talk. This is how to listen to explanations given by others. And basically, he is trying to tell that it's important to listen attentively without either accepting or rejecting what is being said, and to ask oneself, what does he mean? And is that true? Then don't answer that question quickly from your mind, because then you might be answering from your own conditioning. But stay with that question, observe in your daily life, and try to find the answer there. That's how one should relate to what one listens from anyone else. Then that we need to be aware that we are deeply conditioned. There is the biological conditioning in the form of instincts. We are born with it. Then there is the cultural conditioning, which is different in different families and different religious groups and nationalities. And then there is the psychological conditioning of the hurts or pleasures which are remembered from one's childhood. And finally, there is the conditioning which considers oneself as a separate self, separate from the others. He tries to point out that all these illusions are simply constructs of the mind. They don't have a reality in nature. And unless we free ourselves from this conditioning, we need to discuss that. What freedom doesn't mean that the conditioning is absent, but that it doesn't dominate our consciousness and we are willing to question it. We are not looking at the world through this conditioning. So we don't identify even with our own conditioning. Then regarding ideology, he says ideologies are all constructs of the human mind, whether made by Marx or Freud or Jung or anybody else. And if we identify ourselves with an ideology, either communist ideology or capitalist ideology, and so on, or religious belief, then we look at the world through the screen of this ideology or view, and therefore we don't see the truth. So it is important not to attach oneself to this, though it exists within our mind, and to be aware, deeply aware of one's own conditioning. That makes us relatively free from this conditioning, which is the known. So the actuality is different from what we see through the ideology, which means the same thing as approaching everything afresh without bringing in the past knowledge and past conditioning. Again, it's not a voluntary thing. You can't decide to do this. But if you are aware of this, you don't get trapped in your own opinions. You're willing to question your own opinions, look at them, hold them lightly, and drop them if they are false. Then he talks about the order in consciousness, which is both virtue and he calls it love. That love is affection for everything and everybody without a motive. So there is no self-motive in that quality of affection. And as we have discussed earlier, we all have this capacity of doing something for the love of it. But when we become ambitious or we seek an achievement, it becomes a desire process, and then it ceases to be simply without a motive. So the motive kills the state of love. And it's important to respect sensitivity, which means you feel intensely for everything around you, and not only for things which your conditioning says are important, and other things which are not important you ignore. That would prevent a holistic perception of reality. So it is necessary to be aware of that and not approach life egoistically with a motive. And to be aware of all this is to be relatively free of the effect of all this. Then he says we have become very clever because of our education and the development of the intellect. And that sustains the ego because very clearly the ego defends through arguments and so on. So to be aware of that also, because he says cleverness is worldliness. We use it for managing our way through society, through the world. All of which sustains again the ego. And in relationships, he talks about living without images. That means not carrying on with images formed from past experience and not looking at your friend or your wife or husband through that image, but to approach each relationship afresh. That is the same as dying every day, which we have discussed earlier. And lastly, he talks about the need for cooperation, that cooperation requires this quality of love without a motive or friendship without a motive, which includes difference of opinion. So the love is not, or friendship is not destroyed by difference of opinion, which means you give the right to the other person to differ from you. And you are not sure of your own opinion or of his opinion. And you are more concerned with what is true rather than with defending your own opinion. We have all had the experience of listening to debates through our college and university life and so on. And there are always two sides to the debate. If you take sides with the opinion, then you don't learn much. But if you listen to both the sides without taking sides with either opinion, which is what the judge would be doing if he is sitting there to evaluate the debate, that is important, not to attach yourself to any side, to any religion, to any nationality. Of course, you have a nationality, your family has a religion and so on, but not to be attached to that. It is not to let it dominate in one's consciousness. That is essential for cooperation, and that's a major requirement because if you can't do very much singly, you need to work with others. And this cooperation is again brought down by the ego process, by identification with the me and the mind. And then instead of being concerned with the truth, one becomes concerned with victory for one's own point of view. So these are the points that he makes. Some of them are similar to the ones we have already discussed, but it doesn't matter. We can discuss again. And I recall in one of his videos, he starts his dialogue by asking, what shall we discuss? And somebody suggests, sir, shall we discuss desire? And another man says, no, sir, we discussed that last week. So Krishnaji stops him and says, just a minute, sir. Why should we not discuss it? Are you free from desire? Just because you discussed it last week, you should not discuss it again. Doesn't hold. Because you need to look at that question again every time until you have seen the truth of it and freed yourself of the false. Now, regarding today's chapter heading, coming upon a mind without separation, which means without any division. We must investigate how division arises. Because when we become aware of how division, our own mind creates division, then it is possible that we may not approach life with such a mind and therefore not create division. So again, it's a negative approach, not suppressing the feelings of division, but watching them to understand the source from which they arise. So I'll do that for a while before we discuss questions. Now, how does this division arise? Everything in nature is different from everything else. Even two leaves of a tree are not identical. Human beings are different, they are not identical. So, why don't we simply perceive differences as differences? And why do some differences create division? That's an important question to investigate in one's life. For example, we have had wars between religious groups, between one ideology and another ideology, between one nationality and another nationality. But we have not had war between tall people and short people. They are different from each other, but they don't group together. And they don't defend their particular group. They are individuals. So we have to understand this whole business of group formation, of this identification with people of one nation or one religion or one ideology. How does the mind define who are we and who are they? It's important how the mind creates that boundary between we and they. Right now, we are experiencing severe consequences of this in the form of the war in Gaza. And you can see the results. You can see that the Prime Minister or President of Israel is very concerned about the 40 or so people who have been taken prisoners by Hamas. But he is not concerned about 1 million others who are living in Palestine. So this is what happens when you identify with a particular group, a fragment of humanity. And it's important. If you want to avoid division in life, that means avoid conflict in life, both within yourself and with others, it's important to watch this tendency of identifying with an ideology or with a nation or with a religious belief or with your own opinions and fighting for them. Because then your concern is not with truth, your concern is with victory for the me and the mind. And that is precisely what is causing all these wars all over the world. And if you take sides in the war, you contribute to that division. Now it's important to work in groups because you can't do very much singly in life. You have to work. The school teachers in a school are a group. Workers in a hospital are a group. But these groups don't create division. One hospital is not against another hospital. And one school is not against another school. So these are innocent groups working together for a certain cause. But other groups become sinister. If you identify with the white man and another person with the black man, you have racial groups opposing each other. And similarly, if you identify with Christianity and with Jewish religion, then you create a division between Jews and Christians, and Hindus and Muslims, and so on. We are all aware of this. Krishnaji has explained all this in detail. So it's important not to identify oneself with any religion, any belief. Listen to all of them. Don't identify yourself with any, because in identifying with a fragment, you separate yourself. Your mind ceases to be global. It becomes parochial. It becomes local. And two parochial minds will fight with each other and kill each other. So it results in violence and war. The truth is that there is not a tremendous difference between the Jew and the Arab. They are not different in their body. You can ask any medical man, doctor, and he will tell you that the body functions exactly the same way for the Jew and for the Arab. They are not very different in consciousness. You see, when a child is killed, how the Jews suffer, and in the same way, how a child is killed, how the Arabs suffer. So sorrow is the same, greed is the same, desire is the same, fear is the same. Basically, consciousness is the same. It's just the conditioning which has occurred because one is born in a particular area, a particular family, and then grows up, and society's propaganda infects our mind. And that propaganda says, our country is the greatest country and it's heroic to die for it and so on, because they want soldiers to fight for their country. So they do this. Throughout education also this is promoted. So to be aware of all that is to be free of this propaganda. Without that, there is no possibility of coming upon a mind without separation. Now, differences are normal and common. If one can perceive that the Muslim is praying to God in a mosque in a particular way, which is called namaz, and the Hindu is doing the same thing in the way he has been taught, by making a statue of the god and offering flowers and singing bhajans in front of it, then you will just see that these are two people doing the same thing in a different way. That doesn't create division. But the moment you say, this is superior, that is inferior, this is mine, that is not mine, you have created division. So it's our own mind that creates a division out of a difference. So live with this question in your daily life and watch whether you can watch all differences of opinion, differences of color, differences of belief, differences of methods of rituals, etc., only as a difference and not as a superiority or inferiority, then it doesn't create division. So it's not that the mind is not aware of everything. It's aware of everything, but it has not identified itself with one particular fragment. That's the quality of the religious mind, because only then it is a mind that is free from division and therefore has this quality of affection and love towards all, not only human beings, but also animals, also plants, also mountains and rivers and so on. A quality of affection for no motive. If you look at a river and value it because it gives you water, it gives you electricity and so on, it becomes an egoistic look. But when you don't look with that motive at a river or an animal, then it's just a thing of beauty. And I am reminded of what I think Keats wrote. He said, truth is beauty, and beauty truth. That's all there is to know and all that you need to know. Krishna ji is saying something similar. That this state of being, which is a state of love, is also the state of beauty, is the state of freedom from the ego and the conditioning, is the creative state. And he says, without this quality of love and sensitivity being intense feeling for everything, no problem can be solved. So it's important to come upon that state for oneself, not only for solving the problems of one's own life, but also the problems of the world. Because our life is not separate from the world. Millions of people like you and me, the way we live, the way we think, the way we approach life, creates society. So when you realize that you are the world, then it becomes a tremendous responsibility to not contribute to more hatred and more division and more war in the world. And naturally, you won't be creating if you are free from anger, from division within your own life and within your own person. So it's a deep search because for millions of years, we have been conditioned into division and into fighting for victory. And it has been promoted. The ego has been promoted. I said in one of the previous talks that there is no ego anywhere in nature except in human consciousness. So it's created by our own thinking. And if you learn about it, how it is created, you can unlearn it. You can unlearn it if you see the danger of it. But unfortunately, we don't see the danger of it. It seems to be protective. It seems to be a friend who is defending oneself, the me and the mind, and promoting the interest of the me and the mind. So long as the mission of life is to promote the interests of the me and the mind, which is the self, which is the ego, war and division are inevitable, both in one's personal life and therefore also in the national life and the global life. We are seeing tremendous tragedy and consequences of this. And you can't find a structural solution to this. Because what the United Nations and so on do is only try to ameliorate the symptom. The war, the killing, the division is just a symptom. The underlying cause is the hatred between the two communities. That is not addressed. And so the problem keeps coming up again and again and again. No problem, no war has ever produced peace in the long run. It has in fact sown the seeds for the next war. So the psychological and the physical are a continuity. If you don't deal with the psychological, the physical division will arise and violence will arise. It's wrong to think that you can solve this problem by just making some agreements, some noble thoughts and so on. That's been tried time and again over the centuries. But for thousands of years, humanity has been at war, and we are still at war. Krishna said there has been no psychological evolution. This evolution does not take place with time. Time doesn't help you. Perception helps you, and therefore perception is real action. Not all those intellectual agreements and theories and so on. They are not. They are evasion of the problem. So he's pointing out to very deep-rooted causes and saying that the world is the way it is because we are the way we are. And unless we change, not just in ideas and opinions, but at the root of consciousness, what he calls the transformation of consciousness. And next week, in that question and answer which I mentioned about standing against society, he goes into detail about what is this transformation and how it comes about. So we'll discuss it further next week, or not next week, 2 weeks later. And I hope next week you will have a good time, a good learning, listening to some of the talks arranged by the Krishnamurti Foundation of America in Ohio. You can visit kfa.org and get the details of their gathering and how one can join their programs. Thank you. I will end it here and we can have a discussion on any of these issues.
Okay, we'll have a 5-minute break.
All right. Yes, thank you.
Thank you. I will say, if anyone wants to put questions into the chat box, Krasimir will be uh, lining up the questions, so you're welcome to enter any questions in to the chat.
Yeah, I also wanted to remind you that you can ask the question anytime in between the sessions also by sending them to Mr. Pongara Prasad, and he will uh, communicate them to me, and I shall give brief responses to them as I do with the questions which come on the chat. Kasimir, your turn now.
Krasimir, you need to, yeah, you unmute. Perfect.
Yes.
Go ahead.
Wonderful. So we have a few questions, and we can start with Kanchan's question first. Krishnaji suggests that there is no inherent division between oneself and others, oneself and one's enemies or so-called opponents. Does this notion also imply that there is no fundamental difference between emotions such as love and hate?
No. the capacity for love is there in human consciousness and has been provided by nature into human consciousness. Every human being possesses it. But it is this ego process which is the creation of our own thinking. The ability to think is also a result of nature, produced by nature, but nature has not dictated how we should think. So it's our doing if we use the thinking in the manner of creating motives and seeking victory and so on, or we use it with love, to care, to feel for others and for our environment. We have not learned the right use of the faculties which nature has endowed us with. And therefore, we are making wrong use of these capacities, these faculties. All these capacities and faculties are needed, were needed for survival when man evolved in the forest. But in today's environment, you need to be careful not to use them in a destructive way, to use them in a constructive way. And this learning is what is called self-knowledge. Learning the right use of the faculties that we are, and being aware of the danger of the wrong use of them. Not right and wrong in some religious orthodox sense, but simply in the sense of it is wrong if it leads to violence and killing and unhappiness, and it is right if it is healthy and leads to happiness and well-being for everybody. So one is not using the words right and wrong in that way. The religious definition of right and wrong is that any action done with an egoistic motive is wrong, even if it succeeds. And it is right if it is done with love, even if it fails. So it's not the result that determines whether it was right or wrong. It is the state of mind in which that action is performed. And what Krishna is talking about is to come upon the right state of mind, which is wisdom. And that wisdom will tell you how to use these faculties. You can't depend on somebody else to tell you what to do. I'll give you an example. Supposing you go on a picnic with your friend near a river, and the river is flooded, and your friend enters the water, and he's drowning. How will you decide whether you should jump to save him or not jump? You will have, there is no time there to go and ask your guru what to do. You will decide on the basis of what your wisdom tells you. And that will include the awareness of whether you know swimming sufficiently, whether you can save your friend, or whether you will also drown with him, and so on. So life is like that. Decisions have to be taken all wars are a sign of lack of wisdom. The wise don't fight. like this and kill each other. Jesus Christ said exactly this thing when he was being killed. He said, God forgive them, for they know not what they do. He had compassion for their ignorance instead of anger, which means he was not reacting egotistically. If we are followers of Christ, we have to find out what does it mean? How do you come upon that state in which Christ said those words? Otherwise, what kind of follower are you? Just going to church and dipping bread in wine, and anybody can do that. That's not actual follower. So you can't really follow the wise because it's not a matter of decision. It is a matter of coming upon the wisdom. And knowledge is not wisdom. Self-knowledge creates wisdom in the consciousness. That's why Krishnaji emphasizes self-knowledge. Unfortunately, we have not valued this quest for self-knowledge in our education. So that's why Krishnaji tried to change education. It's not easy because all your teachers come from society and they are conditioned by what is going on in society. So it's important to not be trapped in social propaganda, not simply copy society around you and adjust to it. If I might quote Krishnamurti, he said, adjusting to a sick society is no sign of health. Adjusting to a sick society is not a sign of health. So that's why standing against society, but it needs a lot of intelligence how to stand. So he has also talked about revolutions, physical revolutions, armed revolutions. They have led nowhere because you just replace one set of egoistic individuals with another set of egoistic individuals with somewhat different ideas. But it's the ego that is the problem, not their ideas. The ideology doesn't do very much. Communism didn't end violence. Communism ended only certain structures. You can't solve this problem structurally. He's saying it demands a transformation of consciousness. Unfortunately, humanity has not valued that. He's not saying you must agree with him, but he's saying look at it. If it is true, work on it. If it is false, just drop it, throw it away.
Thank you, Professor Krishna. We have a question from Rajeshwari. First, there is an introduction and then there is the question following. Not all can inquire in a razor-sharp way, and further do it honestly and nakedly with oneself. In fact, even if they may do so, each may be at a different pace, too. There is no end here to be achieved, but simply the love to find one's true self, free from all layers of beliefs. And the question is, what was Kay's perspective on how a state or country should be administered meanwhile, composed of people with different mindsets?
The mind or the intellect is a barrier. And this clever use of thought is only a way of defending one's own position. So you don't need a very razor sharp mind for this. What you need is a heart with love. I remember a talk Krishnamurti gave in 1984, I think, in Bombay, where he said, put your intellect in the heart. Heart, he means love and compassion. The intellect, if it is functioning with love and compassion, has value. But when it is functioning without love and compassion, it becomes destructive. The devil also uses it. God also uses it. Both God and devil being concepts created by man. Both use thinking to attain what they want to attain. What determines whether he is a God or a devil? Qualities of the heart. Whether there is love and compassion or there is selfishness and the ego. The devil has the ego and God is unselfish. Just conceptually, that is what it is, goodness. And the other is evil. But these are conceptual things. In actual fact, when we are acting egoistically, we are being evil. I once asked Krishnamurti a question in Brockwood. I said, sir, is anyone with the self necessarily evil? He said, no, not he is evil. There is evil in him. There is a very subtle difference. That he is evil is a judgment condemning the person. The other is a statement that to the extent to which he is selfish, evil is there in him, is functioning through him. So what is required is not anger and retaliation and so on, but compassion. That evil is born of ignorance. And when a man is ignorant, you need to help him solve that ignorance. It doesn't solve by retaliating and beating him and putting him in prison and so on. So we are approaching ignorance very wrongly. Another episode which I recall is when Mahatma Gandhi was murdered by a man called Godse in Delhi, 30th January 1948. Krishnaji was giving talks in Bombay, and somebody asked him at the end of his lecture, sir, who was responsible for Gandhi's murder? And he said, he gave a long reply, but I am paraphrasing it. Each one of you who is divided from his fellow man on the basis of religion, on the basis of ideology, on the basis of nationality, is responsible for that murder. Now, that sounds very strange to us because we are used to a mind which says the man who pulled the trigger and killed Gandhi, he was responsible and he should be hanged, which is what the law did. But what is Krishnamurti saying? How are we all responsible? Go a little deeper. Ask yourself, was Godse born a murderer? No. No child is born a murderer. He grew up in this society. And his mind got infected with religious division, with casteism and so on, which is all the propaganda of society. And who creates this society? You and I. We have all created this society in which the child becomes like that. So we are responsible for all the evil in the world, but we don't realize it. We don't realize it. That's what it means. You are the world. It seems like a conceptual thing. And he's saying, no, that's the fact. The fact is that the way you relate, the way you talk, the way you act, creates society. And millions of people like you, with ignorance, create the society that we are seeing around us. And all the disorder in society comes from that. So each one of us is contributing to that disorder. But we object only to a very big manifestation of it, like murder or war and so on. And we think only the people who were immediately responsible for it were guilty. No, all of us are guilty of having created this society in which our own children are becoming murderers and rapists and terrorists. Their mind is being infected by our society, which has been created by our minds. Sorry, it's not a pleasant thought, but we are not here seeking pleasure. We are seeking the truth.
Thank you, Professor. We have a question from Anshuman. We can observe the conditioning in ourselves that divides us from other religions, nations, and try to dissolve it. However, if another individual or group identifies with their group conditioning to the extent that they adopt violence, jihad, war, and that becomes a threat to our existence, how should we approach that problem?
Well, we are all living dangerously. The million people in Gaza who are being starved to death are you and me. It can happen tomorrow here, because all the seeds of all that violence and disorder are present here, just as much as they are present in Israel and in Gaza. It's just a matter of chance that it is happening there. Sometimes it happens between blacks and whites in America. Sometimes it happens between Hindus and Muslims in Kashmir, and so on. Sometimes in Somalia, sometimes in different parts of the world. We know that. We are objecting only to very large manifestations of the evil. We are not objecting to the source of the evil. The source of the evil lies in each one of us. So each one of us is contributing to the state of the world, but we are not aware of it. We are quite happy if around us things are going on and it doesn't matter. There is another thought that Krishnamurti expressed, which we need to investigate, which comes to my mind. I think it is in the book Krishnamurti to himself, in one of the initial 2 or 3 chapters. He says, if you have no relationship with that tree on the distant hill, you will have no relationship with mankind. very drastic statement. But investigating, why is it that I don't feel interested in that tree in the distant hill? Because there is nothing it gives me. So if I am valuing things only because of what I receive from them, then I am trapped in the ego process, which is the same process which will prevent me from being related to humanity. So it's a very deep observation that we are not sensitive when we are egoistic. And if you are insensitive, you don't feel for trees or birds or animals, and therefore naturally also not for human beings. Not very different. All other things have already been tried, sir. We have tried religion, we have tried science, we have tried knowledge, philosophy. We have some of the most brilliant minds in universities and so on. But the world is the way it is. We read every day in the newspapers about it. So none of these methods have solved the problem. Communism has not solved it. Capitalism has not solved it. And Krishnaji is saying it will never get solved until each one of us transforms our consciousness. And it cannot be done through propaganda. You can alter opinions through propaganda. Hitler made a very strange statement, but true statement. True when you are trapped in this propaganda world. He said the only difference between truth and a lie is in the number of times it has been repeated. The advertising world has picked up on it. They keep on saying Coca-Cola is good, Coca-Cola is good, Coca-Cola is good, and that becomes truth, that Coca-Cola is good. So the human mind is very vulnerable. It gets trapped in propaganda. The terrorist is a poor fellow who has been trapped in propaganda. He has been told that if he kills for protecting his religion, then he will go to heaven and so on, so on. All lies. So how will you change that, sir? You can't. Every individual needs to be freed of ignorance. That's why it should be part of education. And we have not realized it because we still value achievement. Becoming director of a scientific institute, getting Nobel Prize, and so on. And then what? Making weapons out of it to kill more efficiently. Without wisdom, it will inevitably go wrong. That is the truth. And if you doubt it, do doubt it. But please stay with the question and look at it. Without wisdom, it will invariably go wrong. It's not a problem that can be solved by structure, by propaganda, by ideology. No. Because our consciousness is creating the society. And if our consciousness has violence, each one of us is contributing to a sea of violence. And we are only objecting to the storm that comes in that sea, sometimes in Kashmir, sometimes in Los Angeles, sometimes in Gaza, and so on. So unless you deeply explore the cause of all this, not be satisfied with simply that there was this land and that was given to so-and-so, and that's a social cause. There is always an external cause. But the inner causation within human consciousness is a much deeper causation. And The outer cause is simply a symptom. It will never solve. If you keep treating symptoms, it will never solve. And it has not solved. I don't have to, it's not my opinion. History is telling us that. The Mahabharata war was probably fought 5,000 years ago. And we were fighting 3,000 years ago. And then 1,000 years ago. And we're still at war. Sir, where are you? No, none of these solutions that we have tried is working. Have humility to acknowledge that and change yourself. Your personal life is not separate from society.
Thank you, Professor. Now we have a question from Sam. It is a question in 4 parts, so I can read the entire, all the 4 parts, and then if you would like, we can go through them one by one. Professor, isn't there motive inherently in existence? Isn't there motive even in peace or love? Is there such a thing as without motive? Isn't even the desire to be without motive a motive?
Is that whole of it?
Yes, that's the whole.
Okay, I don't need to answer separate parts. Sir, have you not grown a plant in your garden just for the love of it? To see it grow, to see its branches, the flowers that come, has always been done with motive. If somebody falls down on the road, do you approach him always with a motive? Do you save him or help him so that he will help you later on in life? Or there is a spontaneous action coming out of love, out of compassion, out of affection without any motive. So we are capable of it. But what has happened is that where our profit lies, where our money lies, where our security lies, that's where we give importance. The importance given to being successful, rising to the top, defeating everybody else, getting claps from society, achieving fame. All that is part of that egoistic motivation. But we are capable of doing everything for the love of it. Do you think Einstein was studying the universe and space-time in order to get the Nobel Prize? No, sir. That was his passion. He was wondering, what is wrong? And out of that wonder, he got this. So we are all capable of that. When Faraday discovered electromagnetism, it was the first time somebody had seen that electricity and magnetism are connected to each other. They are not separate forces. He demonstrated it in a big hall to the public. He took a metal coil, connected it to a current measuring instrument called an ammeter or galvanometer, and he pushed a magnet towards the center of the coil. And he showed that a current flowed in this, even though he was not touching the thing with the magnet. Simply the change of magnetic flux linked with the coil produce electricity. It was a miraculous discovery. Somebody at the back of the audience got up and asked him, all this is very well, but of what use is this discovery? And his answer, which has become a classic in the field of science, was, sir, it's a newborn child. Of what use is a newborn child? So not everything and all the time we don't do things only with a motive and in order. We also are capable of doing things just for love, for compassion. But we have given tremendous value to where our ego is attached, to winning a war, to defeating all our colleagues and going to the top. We have not given importance to working cooperatively with affection. Look at the way we are conducting democracy, sir. Democracy is supposed to be, the spirit of democracy is cooperation. The opposition are simply friends with a difference of opinion. They are pointing out to you that the plans you are making are not right. They will create havoc and so on. And they are suggesting alternative plans. They are working for the same cause, for the welfare of the people and the nation. But they have a different idea from what you have. They're not enemies. They are friends with a difference of opinion. But look at what we have. We cheat. We use money power to buy votes, to buy legislators. We have evolved a system, and we ourselves are killing that system, defeating that system. We have created the system of courts and judiciary, and we produce false witnesses in order to win a case. It's going on right now, sir. In the United States, it's going on right now. Lawyers are paid to tell lies, to fool the judge. Poor judge. Lawyers on both sides are telling lies and doing propaganda in order to win their case so that they receive money from their client. And this poor judge, he is supposed to sort out all this and do justice. What kind of world is it, sir? The ego is dominating, no? And you see the consequences of it. How will you change that? So long as the ego is in operation, this is how it will run. And that's what is happening. It's not democracy. Without the spirit of democracy, it is not democracy. Spirit of democracy is the spirit of humility, which says none of us really knows what is the best way to organize our society. Let us sit down and confer with each other. Listen to each other as friends. Educate ourselves about the issues that face our country or our society. Then we will invite proposals and we will vote. If there are more than one proposal, we will vote to decide which proposal to take up. But when you adopt a proposal, it may not have been your proposal. It may have been your friend's proposal. we all contribute to the success of that. That's democracy. That's a spirit of sportsmanship, if you like, friendship. We have reduced it to telling lies, defeating people by doing this. Examinations in education are meant to help us know where our weaknesses are so that we can learn better in that aspect. We have reduced it to trying to win by copying, by telling lies, by memorizing without learning. So we have instituted a system and we cheat the system. That cheating is done because of the ego. So the ego is the most dangerous thing. And all Krishnaji is asking us is, for God's sake, realize the danger of the ego. And it is coming only from your approach. It's not part of nature. It's not like your stomach or liver or lungs. It's not there in your body. It's in the manner in which you are approaching life is egoistic. And you are using all your thought and capacity and ability to promote that. For God's sake, realize the danger of it. If you realize the danger of it, actually realize it, not intellectually agree that logically, I have explained logically, but this is not enough. If you perceive the danger, you won't go in that direction. Just as you perceive the danger of a precipice, so you stop there. You don't go there. It doesn't require some guru to tell you that you must not jump into the precipice. So once you see the danger, that intelligence which nature has put into us will act. But because we don't see the danger of the ego, because we think it is our friend, it leads to success, it leads to profit and so on. We engage in it and we are not watched the consequences. He is pointing out the consequences and he's saying, so long as you are approaching life this way, it will never solve. All your problems are coming from it. Listen to it, find out whether what he is saying is true. If it is true, act on it. If it is not true, forget it.
Next, we have a question from Hansa. Following JK, we can see our thoughts. But how can all humans or society change, since very few are following?
Are you really doing it to solve this problem of society? You won't be able to change society. Look at it. Buddha couldn't change society. Krishnamurti couldn't change society. Jesus Christ could not change society. Socrates could not change society, which doesn't mean that all these people have no value. Society is 7 billion or more egos operating. You can't change society. You can perhaps change yourself. Don't generalize it and say, because other people are not changing, therefore I will not change. If you believe in that, then that's all right. Live like that. When your child gets killed in a war, you will cry and you will ask, why did this happen? But when all million children are dying in Palestine, it is only news for us. Do think about it.
We have a question now from Shamal Rao. First, there is a statement, and then there is a request related to that statement. The statement is, differences are neither inferior nor superior. I request Professor Krishna to elaborate on this statement because differences only contribute to much of the sorrow experienced in society.
Sir, I was discussing how division arises in our mind. How a difference, which is a natural thing, creates a division. Division means then there is a conflict, there is a hatred, there is anger, and so on. We were investigating that. And there may be many ways in which it happens, but one of those is that we judge and evaluate. Now, how do you judge and evaluate? How do you measure? With your thought. Where is the thought coming from? From your memory. In that memory is all your conditioning. So that is operating. If you are born in India, sexuality is looked down upon as an animalistic part of our life. If you are born in America, it is extolled, considered as a great joy and something to be cultivated. So if you are in India, you get angry when you see a boy and a girl kissing on the roadside. The American doesn't get angry. So that judgment from which dislike is born is coming from your own conditioning, which contains your own values, cultural values, and so on. That's the propaganda of your particular society in which you were born. You could have been born in China or in Russia or anywhere else. You will be thinking something else differently. So that's not an absolute truth, what your mind tells you. That's why Krishna says, can you look at yourself, your feelings and so on, without judging, without condemning, without measuring? Just see what is taking place. Be a witness to what is taking place. A lot of learning comes from just being a witness consciousness, not a judging consciousness. The judgment comes from your conditioning and introduces the subjectiveness of your approach. That's how I understand.
So now we have about 4 minutes left, and we have several more questions. So I'll leave it up to you, Professor, if you would like to answer one more question, or we can reserve time for parting announcements.
Yeah, if you have announcements to make, you do that. If you have time before 10:30, which means the next 5 minutes, then I can take up another question, or as before, you write all these questions in the chat by email, and I will give brief responses to each one of them, which will then be transmitted to all the participants.
Yes, we will definitely write you an email with all the remaining questions. I am thinking that the next question may not be very short to answer, so it would be best to send it to Professor Krishna in an email.
Sure.
So I would like to turn it over to the organizers, Prasad and Donna, in case there are some parting remarks.
Prasad, would you like to go ahead? I know you had a question or something you wanted to specifically share with everyone.
Thanks, Donna. So I just wanted to remind everybody that Professor Krishna has advised that you don't need to limit your questions only during the session. If you are mulling some of these things and if some questions arise, please send that to me, and then we will collate those questions and get a response from Professor Krishna. So thank you very much, Professor Krishna, for agreeing to for suggesting that. I think that's a great idea. And another thing that I wanted to remind also is Professor Krishna's advice that that one must not take answers as his answers are always as the final thing. Let that be, your starting point to go into that, and what comes up. Maybe Professor Krishna might want to.
I would like to add, Prasad,
Yes.
that's a very important thing. I mean, we already said this about in today's talk. When summarizing what Krishnaji has written, he made it very clear how we should approach explanations given by other people. That applies to explanations given by me, or also explanations given by Krishna. You are not required to either accept them or reject them. The suggestion is investigate. That's all. Because it is in investigating a question that one can come upon a deep insight for oneself. The answer kills the question, and therefore beware of answers.
Okay. Thank you, sir. And I think one final reminder, I think Professor Krishna already reminded that we don't have a session next week, and we'll be meeting the following week. That's all, Donna.
Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you. Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you,
Thank you.
Professor Krishna and Prasad and Kresimir. Thank you,
Thank you very
everyone.
much. Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Professor.